The story begins by locating ourselves in a kind of battle that took place between a quite large group of heroes and our protagonist, a demon who unfortunately had suffered quite serious wounds and was barely able to stand up. Opportunity that the heroes did not waste, and each of them used their best attack to finish him off. For his part, the latter seemed quite calm, although he knew that he could not avoid an attack of that magnitude. So after receiving the devastating impact that destroyed much of the area in which they were, he came to the conclusion that yes, that was his end. However, he seemed calm, since it was an appropriate ending for a demon king like him. And well, after regaining consciousness, he realized that the heroes had surrounded him, and the worst of all was that his wounds were too serious. Meanwhile, the leader of the heroes approached him to annihilate the crimes for which he was accused, such as having taken the lives of hundreds of knights of his order, or having massacred an innumerable number of innocents. The protag, listening to all this, did not seem very worried. He even accepted having committed those crimes and did not regret it. But hey, after having read the crimes, the hero was willing to finish him off. Although they reveal to us that the reason why the guy was so calm was because he actually had an ace up his sleeve. It was a kind of key with the ability to distort fate, and that according to what he had heard could change the future of people. That yes, he was not entirely sure how it worked. Even so, as he had no other alternatives, just after the hero hit him lethally, the protag in an epic way told him that this was not his end, to just then use the weapon that he had been saving to try to eliminate him. However, the protag did not know that this artifact did not work the way he expected, since apparently it was not a weapon that could eliminate his opponent. That is why his plan failed and he ended up losing his life. That yes, he did not seem to regret anything. After all, he had lived the life he always wanted. However, that was not the end of the boy, since moments later he ended up waking up, but no longer in the current time. In fact, he woke up in his body a few decades before becoming the Demon King, just when he was still a noble despised by his family, because according to them he was a failure, and this was because the key from before did not work as a weapon, rather as an artifact with the ability to go back in time. And well, after assimilating what was happening, he tried to remember everything that happened, to understand how he had reached that point, but no matter how hard he tried, he could not reach a clear conclusion. In fact, he did not even know what he would do from that moment, wondering if he should try to find the key of destiny again to return to his time. By the way, the name of the protagonist was Zeke, and his thoughts were interrupted by the eruption in his room of this boy, Javier, one of the servants of his family, and who referred to him in a quite disrespectful way. This because according to Zeke at that time he was treated as garbage by his family. However, now he was no longer the same as before. So after asking his servant to approach him, he instinctively ended up beating him, since this time he did not plan to let himself be trampled by anyone, and would make Javier understand that he should not disrespect him again, but that he would eliminate him. He also did not stop the beating until the boy apologized on his knees. However, the lesson was interrupted by one of the gentlemen of his family, Dronzer, who apparently, just like Javier, seemed to see the protagonist as a nobody, and in fact he ended up defending the servant, asking the protagonist what the hell was wrong with him. But again, Zeke in his bad way calmly approached the fruit son, asking him if that was the way he should talk to him, and when the guy replied that if he was planning to hit him like Javier, in an epic way Zeke said yes. After all, a dog that did not recognize its owner needed a beating to lower its tail. The angry guard asked him if he thought he would be able to beat him in a battle, to which the proto, while approaching a table in his room, told him that with his body and current skills probably not. However, he could not leave his dog without correction. Obviously his words enraged the gentleman even more, but just before he resorted to him, the latter threw the tablecloth at him to blind him for a few seconds, and with a quick movement he knocked the good Dronzer down, telling him that being strong was not everything. In an epic scene, yes, things did not end there, since after hacking Dronzer, he still had to give the right correction to his other dog, although unfortunately, as the guy was not very appreciated by his family, he was summoned to his father's office to give him a lesson for his acts. Meeting where, by the way, he found Dronzer's son of Fruit, who had gone snitching with the patriarch. Once there, they introduce us to the Count Samuel, the father of Zeke, who was not only furious with him for his previous acts, but also for the disrespectful way with which he had been addressing him, asking him if that was the way the heir of his family should behave, to which the proto sarcastically answered that what the hell was he talking about, since he knew that for no reason he would give that title to him, and he was just looking for the right moment to unburden him. However, his words came as a finger to Allison, his stepmother, who had been waiting for the prota to make a single mistake, so that his son would take the position as the main heir of the family. But hey, when the Count asked the prota for his axe, the latter strangely apologized to him, although not for having hit his servants, rather for having made the mistake of leaving them alive, an error that he planned to solve just at that moment, ending them. His words left everyone cold in the room, who did not know why the previous loser acted that way. On the other hand, Javier tried to defend himself with the excuse that he had never offended his master, a statement that the daughter of fruit of his stepmother planned to support. In addition, the nail that closed the coffin was the eruption of Dronzer, who claimed that Zeke was lying, since Javier had never bothered him. In fact, it was Mr. Zeke who attacked them unilaterally without any reason. However, Zeke continued to behave calmly, telling him that if he planned to get to those instances, the best thing was for them to solve that matter in a trial by combat between the two of them. He also told his father that that was convenient for him, since if he lost it would be the opportunity that he had been waiting for to unearth it. So just as the prota told him, the Count ended up acceding, since according to him there would be no immeasurable reason to get rid of Zeke. What he did not expect was that before retiring, the prota told him that if otherwise he came to win, he would stay with the title of Baron no matter what. And well after the meeting, Zeke began to strengthen his new body, since the difference between his body of Demon King and that of now a young man of 18 years was too big. Although according to him, it would not take him much work to reach a decent level, since inside the destructive and demonic power was latent, which led him to reach his peak of power. However, with what did not count, it was that when he tried to extract a quantity too large of energy, his new body was not able to support it. Even his heart was about to collapse. This since apparently he had made bad calculations and his weak body would only be able to control a very limited amount of mana, otherwise his life would be in danger. In other words, his duel would take more work than I expected. But hey, while he was recovering from the accident, he was approached by his brother Adrian, who in a high-spirited way approached him to make fun of his skills, asking him if he thought that in his current state he would be able to defeat an experienced gentleman. He also told him that the best thing was to leave that new attitude and return to be the same loser who spent it locked in his room. Otherwise his life would be in danger. But he did not expect that at that moment Zeke unleashed a small part of his thirst for blood, a thirst that terrified his brother, telling him that if he was afraid that he would snatch his position as Count. But after Adrian replied that a loser like him would never be at his height, the protagonist with the same threatening tone replied that after his fight with Dronzer, they would have a meeting between the two of them to determine who would be the true heir to his family, leaving the fruit son of Adrian. But hey, weeks later, the day of the fateful fight finally arrived and practically the entire town had attended the Colosseum to see personally the humiliation that Zeke would go through. For his part, before starting, Dronzer advised him to better retire, since if he fought he would end his life. Although of course that was not in the plans of the protagonist. After this little chat, the judge gave the starting order, and without thinking about it, Dronzer struck against Zeke, trying to end the meeting with a single blow. Although he did not expect that the protagonist was able to stop his sword, that yes, he seemed to be resuming work, since as I told you his current body was too weak, so he should expand thoroughly if he wanted to win. For his part, Dronzer, who wanted to dispel his fury, continued to launch bursts of attacks at an incredible speed, bursts that Zeke was barely being able to contain, only waiting for the right time to counterattack. For his part in the stands, some of the servants were surprised that the protagonist was able to survive in a battle against one of the best gentlemen in the family, and that good Zeke, according to them, had never trained properly. Even his father seemed surprised with the battle. Meanwhile, the public continued to support Dronzer to finish with Zeke, and the gentleman planned to give them what they asked for, starting to use the mana to end the meeting once and for all. Although he did not expect that at that moment the protagonist also used the mana to imbue his sword, a skill too advanced for a loser like him. But he was even more surprised after the boy used a technique specialized in launching bursts of cuts, a technique that only the best were able to use. Unfortunately, he was still too weak and none of his cuts managed to connect. Everyone in the stands were shocked with the level that Zeke was demonstrating. Even his father did not understand how that loser had grown so much in just a few days. But let's focus on important. Dronzer, who had understood that the protagonist was not an opponent with whom he could play, decided to get serious and use his best skills to finish once and for all with his life, starting to load an intense burst of mana in his sword to connect a lethal blow. Luckily, the protagonist could feel his thirst for blood, and just in the last minute, he managed to dodge it, which impacted Dronzer, although unfortunately his attack was not yet finished, since the technique consisted of 2 continuous strikes, and unfortunately Zeke was not able to successfully dodge the second, fully receiving the attack that sent him flying several meters back. The wounds that attack had caused him were quite serious. Everyone in the audience believed that the battle had ended with Dronzer as their winner, since according to them no one would be able to recover from an attack like that. However, when Dronzer celebrated his victory, he felt a chill run through his body. A murderous aura seemed to have begun to stalk him. Now that yes, as they suppose it belonged to Zeke, who despite the damage managed to stand up. And this time he had decided to fight using his best skill, which was no other than to eliminate his opponents without mercy. After this, acting like a real demon king, he fought again against Dronzer. But this time he had an ace up his sleeve, which in fact was a dirty trick, since as soon as his opponent got distracted, he took advantage of the moment to throw sand at his face and blind him for a few seconds, which were enough to use the little strength that was left in a tackle and knock him down. Of course, as expected, his strategy worked. Dronzer was not able to recover in time, and the Prota had the space necessary to approach him calmly and place his sword on his neck, asking him to surrender if he did not want to lose his life, to which without more option and being cornered, the guy agreed. For his part, the Prota explained to him that the reason for his defeat was due to his arrogance, since having used all his power from the beginning, the battle had ended without him being able to do anything to counterattack. So he advised him to change his attitude for the future, and well, after his defeat, the judge awarded the victory to Zeke. No one could believe that the Prota had obtained a victory like that. Even his family was shocked. However, most were outraged by the result. After all, for them, he was simply a coward who had used dirty tricks, slandering him, although his insults did not seem to affect Zeke in the least. After all, those were methods that such good results gave him in his past life. For his part, the Count was wondering at what moment Zeke had learned magic techniques, since he had never received adequate training. But his butler explained to him that perhaps he was one of the few privileged who were born with special gifts. For his part, Adrian wondered how the hell his brother was still standing after having received the direct attack of a gentleman, although his thoughts were interrupted by the voice of the Prota, who, as he had promised him, asked him to just at that moment go down to the sand to battle him. For his part, the Count asked him what the hell he was talking about. However, Zeke replied that he should stop being stupid. After all, it was the moment he had been waiting for. The perfect opportunity for Adrian to snatch his noble title. His words surprised everyone in the audience, who wondered if he was in condition to fight another battle. Although that did not seem to matter to Zeke, who continued to call his brother, asking him to face him if he did not want to be branded as a coward in front of everyone. That is why the Count asked Adrian to fulfill the request, telling him that he had nothing to fear. After all, in the state in which he was right now, Zeke would not be able to beat anyone. So following his orders, the boy finally presented himself to the Prota, who emanated a huge thirst for blood, which for moments made the good Adrian tremble, who was sure that this guy was not the stupid brother from before. However, what I did not expect was that when the Prota struck back at him, he was able to stop his strike without too much effort, since apparently Zeke was more tired than he thought and barely had the strength to continue wielding his weapon. That's why the Fruit Son ended up filling up with courage, believing that in reality he had only overestimated him and could defeat him without a problem. After this, now the Prota, who was against the ropes, even took work to defend himself, since the wound that Esser had caused him was larger than he thought, and he didn't even have the energy to use his mana. That's why he made the decision to resolve this duel briefly, and using his demonic personality, with a pinch of strength that he had left, he was able to stop his brother's sword with his own hand, asking him if he had ever heard of a serious fight with meat flying everywhere, to then use the little mana he had left to imbue his own hand and split Adrian's weapon in two, in an epic scene. However, the scene did not end there, since after that he told the boy, who by the way was terrified, that if he did not surrender at that moment, he would end his life right there, no matter what his brother was. And well, after his words, he used the shock that had caused Adrian to hit him with the handle of his sword, which sent him to fly, and with which he even threw a pair of teeth at him. For his part, Adrian, terrified by the thirst for blood that Zeke emanated, he had no choice but to give up between tears, after which the judge again gave the Prota as the winner of the second match. Nobody in Agrada could understand what had happened. For his part, Zeke, now that he had the victory in his hands, he went to his father to fulfill his word, and as he had said, he would grant him the title of Count. However, Samuel, blinded by anger, replied that he would not decide anything. Words that would make all the people in the public begin to see him as a guy without honor. While giving the protest seemed quite calm, since he had predicted that this would happen. So ironically, he replied that in reality he had never wanted that title, and he didn't even like to belong to the nobility, throwing the ring that represented him as part of the family directly at his father's feet. A scene that unleashed the fury of the old man, who immediately asked him what the hell was he doing, to which the proto replied that he would leave his family right at that moment. After those words, he went to his brother to tell him to remember that the way to win a battle was not to fear death, since after all, it would be his obligation to protect that territory. But hey, after ingesting a potion to recover his health, he decided to continue with his journey. After all, he had already done what he always wanted, give a lesson to the fruit children of his family. By the way, before leaving, he had to make a small stop, which was to pick up who would be his load donkey, and yes, I mean Javier, who ended up forcing him to accompany him to take the role of his squire, a purpose that the guy could not reject, since otherwise he would end his life. By the way, the proto planned to train Javier so that he would increase his statistics, since perhaps it could be useful to him in the future, but his training was not important. Now his goal was to visit the neighboring towns, to try to find information about his return, that yes, this time he would try to lead a kinder life, compared to the previous one. Hours later, they show us how he had entered a fairly dangerous forest to cut off his way, although that made Javier nervous, who feared that they would be devoured by the beasts that roamed the area. What he did not know was that in fact the proto planned to use those same beasts to give him the adequate training he needed, and thus increase his skills. The first opponent he would have to face was a low-level goblin, so according to the proto, it would not take him a lot of work to get rid of him. However, he was very wrong, since the boy was more weak than he had believed, and in seconds the goblin managed to knock him down. That's why the good sick was forced to intercede. Just one blow was enough to get rid of the creature. But hey, after this incident he still did not give up, and he continued to force the boy to face the goblins that continued to appear. And in the end his theory seemed to be correct, since Javier, thanks to the indications that Sick gave him, finally managed to get rid of one of the monsters. Seeing this, Sick came to the conclusion that if he gave him the right training, he could become a skilled warrior. He had also begun to earn the respect of Javier, who now saw him as a kind of teacher. However, things did not end there, since seconds later a giant horde of orcs appeared around him. Luckily this time Sick wanted to give the boy a break, and he would take care of all of them. And what for Javier seemed impossible, the proto did not take more than a few seconds, using the rocks he found on the ground, propelled by his strength to finish off hundreds of monsters. The proto was a real beast in combat. But hey, after finishing that and setting up the camp where he would spend the night, he explains to us why he was hated by the Count's family, and it was because apparently his mother had been a tyrant who treated others like garbage. That is why after his death, everyone quenched their grudge against him. However, his memories were interrupted after hearing that a carriage had arrived in the vicinity, so he immediately asked Javier to wake up and put on guard, since apparently they had visitors. For his part, the latter told him that maybe it was only a merchant and they should not worry about it. But the proto replied that that was impossible, since a person in his right mind would never cross such a dangerous forest at that hour of the night. That's why they should be careful. And well, after a while the carriage reached them, which by the way was guarded by several paladins. And the person who was inside was this girl from here, Luna, a kind of priestess whom I kindly recommend to the proto, who also planned to camp in that place. By the way, Zeke already knew that girl from his previous life, since she was the same priestess who accompanied the hero when he tried to end his life. In fact, that meeting seemed to surprise him a lot, since in his past life, something like that did not happen. By the way, the girl was not the only one who recognized her, since the latter was being escorted by an old man who, according to the proto, was an eminence in combat. But hey, the boy decided to act calmly, since after all, now that he wanted to lead a different life, it was a good opportunity to meet different people. By the way, Javier, like a whole sim, was embellished with that priestess, so much that he even ended up helping to set up his camp, although the latter seemed to have been interested in the good Zeke, sitting next to him to get to know him better, an opportunity that the boy did not waste to ask him who had taken him to those places, to which the girl replied that at that moment he was on a purification trip, traveling through different towns to help people with his power. For his part, when the princess asked the proto about his trip, the latter told him that he was simply looking for how to be a good person, words that were totally contradicted. After the next day, while the priestess was touring the town, he ran into the latter, beating a merchant. But hey, after fixing the whole discussion, The girl questioned him because if he wanted to be a good person, he had attacked the guy from before, but the boy replied that in fact he was doing good, since some boys asked him to help them with the beating from before, and he simply agreed. But let's focus on the important thing. The merchant explained to them that his boys had attacked him because for a long time they had wanted to snatch his sales position from him, and he continued to deny it. So after listening to him, the girl told him that she would help him with that problem. By the way, the prota had attacked that guy, actually because thanks to his instincts, he noticed that he emanated a Rashtrara presence, unlike the other boys. So perhaps the priestess was making a serious mistake, and in the end he was right, since days later he ended up running into several posters of the girl, in which they accused her of being a witch who had been casting spells against the town. For her part, Zeke, after reading the poster, he knew that obviously all that was false, but he did not understand why people accused her of something like that. By the way, the news had caused panic in all the inhabitants, since strange incidents had even been occurring in the surroundings, believing that everything was related to the curse that the witch had put on the town. And when the prota returned to the hotel where he was staying and wondered if that incident had also occurred in his past life, he came across one of the phenomena that was scaring the townspeople. It was a kind of undead that appeared just behind him, whose presence terrified Javier, since it was not very common to see monsters like that. Luckily, the prota quickly got rid of him, since monsters like that would not scare those who even used to create them. However, his appearance seemed to worry him, since now he was sure that something like that had not happened in his previous life. But hey, after this, some city guards appeared to take care of the body and took the opportunity to advise them to protect themselves as soon as possible, since the curse they were talking about had been turning the people of the city into zombies like that. And well, once the guys left, Zeke felt a familiar presence in the vicinity, and when he checked the place, he realized that that presence belonged to the priestess, who was now in a quite deplorable state. So after taking her to her inn and giving her some clean clothes, he took the opportunity to ask her where the paladins who used to accompany her were, to which the quite affected girl replied that some were on another mission, but the rest had been eliminated and it was all her fault. For her part, the prota questioned if that had something to do with the one who was now accused, to which the girl replied that she was not responsible for that, and to prove it he confessed what had happened after they separated a few days ago, explaining to him how after his conversation with the merchant, he decided to visit the mayor of the city and thus ask him for a little security for the merchants, which at first seemed to be going well, since they even told him that they would take letters on the matter. However, when he and his group were about to retire, the guy invited them to dinner to celebrate the honor of receiving the visit of a priestess, and the girl had no choice but to accede, without knowing that they were making a serious mistake, since after enjoying the dinner, they came across a shocking scene. The mayor had eliminated all his workers using a kind of black magic that he also used to bring some Cargolas to life in the room, so that they would take charge of the paladins. And that was not all, since the bodies of the people began to rise to join the battle, and as much as their guards were powerful, they were being outnumbered, so they had no choice but to sacrifice themselves to give them enough time to escape. So yes, the real responsible for what happened was the mayor. But hey, the girl explained that the safest thing was that the mayor belonged to a dark organization, which was trying to use the people of the town as a sacrifice to carry out a ritual and gain more power. Luckily for her, he immediately offered to help, since after all, helping her could be considered a good action. And well, the next day, the boy, after getting rid of several of the guards who guarded the mayor's office, managed to infiltrate, taking with him the priestess, who was guiding him to the room where the place had taken place, the event of before. Once there, they ran into the happy mayor, who wielded a fairly dark aura. That's why Sig did not waste time, and he fought back in seconds, although once he was close, he realized that he was not responsible. In fact, it was a simple, lifeless body, which was being controlled by the real culprit. It was this guy here, the member of a criminal organization, who had been passing through the mayor's right hand. For his part, the priestess questioned him what had happened to the paladins, to which the guy confessed that he had used them to feed his fish, words that left the girl cold. Meanwhile, the guy asked the protag who the hell was and why he was helping the priestess, to which as always the latter answered him sarcastically, telling him that he did not care. The only thing that should matter to him was that he planned to destroy him. After his words, the guy put himself on guard and used his magic to control several undead and try to kill Sig. Quickly, the priestess wanted to help the protag, using an enhancement spell on him, but that did not work, since he noticed that a sinister aura was hiding inside him. Although his help was not necessary, since the protag did not take the trouble to get rid of all his opponents. The witch could not believe what she had seen. Wondering who the hell was that guy, he had finished with his weapons as if they were made of paper, and worst of all, he emanated an aura even more terrifying than his. By the way, Sig explains to us that during the last days he had achieved that his body was capable of assimilating more mana. So killing a sorcerer would not take him much work. The angry criminal told him that it would be useless for him to kill him, since the sacrifice ritual had been activated, and there was no way to deactivate it. However, the protag contradicted him, telling him that he knew a way to do it, and for that he would only have to destroy the cursed statues that were required for the ritual, and that he could get rid of them by feeling their aura. That's why he told him that he would take care of that before killing him, so that he could see how his plan was destroyed. His words impacted the guy so much that without thinking about it, he ordered a new attack against him, trying to prevent him from escaping. But again, his zombies were nothing more than garbage for Sig's skills, who after eliminating them escaped from the room, taking the priestess with him. Obviously, the sorcerer could not stay with his arms crossed. So the next day he was in charge of spreading bulletins in which he accused the protag of being an accomplice of the priestess. By the way, the first clue that Sig had to find the cursed statues were the boys who he had helped to beat the merchant a few days ago, and who apparently were the good guys in the story, since after catching them and forcing them to confess why they had carried out the attack, one of them replied that it was because of that guy his brother was in a quite delicate state. And after taking them to where the boy was, the guy confessed that he had witnessed him when the merchant stole the vital energy of his brother. That's why he had tried to capture him to force him to return it to him. Besides, the guy was furious with the priestess, since it was his fault that he had not achieved it. Although things seemed to be different with the protag, to whom the boys treated with a lot of respect, partly because he was the first person in a long time who helped them despite their appearance as plebeians. And well, after obtaining this information, as he said, Sig made him a small visit to the merchant from before, although after corralling him he told him that this time he would not be so kind as the last time he helped him. Now he planned to break each of his bones if he did not give them the information they were looking for. On the other hand, the fruit's son, when he saw himself corralled, asked them why the hell they attacked him that way, to which the protag responded in a cold tone that he stopped pretending, since they were aware of how he had been stealing the vital energy of the plebeians to feed the statue he had in his store. After all, the blood aroma was impossible to hide. Although after noticing how the boy continued to deny everything, Sig pulled out his dagger, telling the priestess that that guy would not open his mouth. Also, now that they knew where the statue was, the best thing was to finish once and for all with a scum like him. However, when he was about to finish him, the latter finally spoke, asking him not to end his life, and in return he would give him the exact location of the rest of the statues, since if apparently he was not using a single statue to gather the energy necessary for the ritual. In reality, he had scattered several of these throughout the perimeter. But hey, after finding out about this, the protag questioned where the rest of the supposed statues were, to which the guy, revealing his true macabre personality, replied that he would not tell him so easily. After all, that was his only life insurance. So if he dared to give him one more blow, he could never stop the blissful ritual. On the other hand, the priestess questioned him why he was doing that, knowing that in case the ritual was carried out, the whole town would be completely destroyed, to which the guy replied that simply for money. After all, he would earn a lot in exchange for stealing the vital energy of a few plebeians. But hey, after commenting on this, he asked the protag to release him, and once he was safe, he would let him know the exact location of the statues. Otherwise, there was no deal. What he did not expect was that at that moment Sig replied that he had changed his mind, and at that moment he planned to end his life, explaining to him that thanks to the demonic energy that emanated from each statue, it would not be difficult for him to deal with the rest of them. Also, now that he had obtained all the useful info from him, it would no longer be useful to him. Of course, the guy begged for his life, asking the priestess to stop that guy. However, the latter concluded that the decision of the protag was the correct one. So despite the desperate shouts of the priestess, the protag released a bit of his old bloodthirst as a demon, ending his life coldly. But hey, after this, they both left the facilities to start the search for the rest of the statues. Yes, the girl seemed quite affected by what happened hours before. However, Sig made her come in right, explaining that sometimes darknesses like the one before never changed their nature. So the best thing was to finish them off. In addition to this, he told her that his purification skills would be key to stop the ritual that was being carried out. And well, a few days later, and after killing several men at the service of the guy from before, he had the first statue, which was not difficult to find for Sig. thanks to all the damn energy that emanated, and after finding it, he asked the priestess to use her skills to purify a little paint which he used to engrave a kind of ancient runes on the outside of the statue, telling the girl that that would be enough for the gathered energy to begin to fade and therefore the ritual could not be carried out. But hey, a few days later we see how the protag had been drawing the same runes on the rest of the statues they found on the perimeter. However, the priestess began to wonder if the theory of the protag about how that would be enough to stop the ritual was true. After all, he had never heard of a technique like that. However, his doubts were resolved after running into a zombie like the one before, which, unlike the last time, acted erroneously and his movements were much slower. So after getting rid of him, Sig explained to the priestess that his efforts were beginning to give results, since from what I saw, the strength of the ritual had decreased considerably, telling her that it was time to carry out a new attack on the mayor's mansion, where the last of the statues was located, since it was the ideal time now that the strength of the ritual had decreased. Yes, according to Sig, it would not be an easy task, since the most likely thing was that the guy from before was already waiting for them, and he would be prepared with several countermeasures to end their lives, so they had to be prepared for any threat they could face. And well, after telling him this, they both set off to the castle, where the priest asked the priestess to stay behind him at all times and follow his instructions without hesitation. Although after those words, as soon as they entered the facilities, they were attacked by a kind of specters, with the only purpose of ending the lives of the intruders. Luckily, the priest managed to react in time, and of course, he immediately recognized the blessed creatures, since in his years as a demon, he also used them as servants. And after that, he started a fight against the latter, which did not last long, since as we know, the abilities of the priest were at a very different level, and that added to the fact that he knew the weakness of the creatures. It was enough for dozens of them to be made without much problem. But hey, once the altercation was over, the girl told the priest that they should hurry, since he could feel a very strong demonic energy around them, which made him think that perhaps the ritual was still quite strong, and his suspicions were confirmed when the same son of fruit from before presented himself to them, telling him that he was right, and the energy of the ritual remained intact. The worst of all was that after commenting on it, he tried to use the blessed energy to affect both the priestess and the priest, and turn them into his puppets. What he did not expect was that before that happened, the priest gathered a monstrous amount of mana in his sword, and after taking the girl in his arms, it was enough for a single blow to create a huge explosion, which not only spread the energy that was accumulating around him, but also destroyed much of the facilities of the castle where they were. By the way, the priestess could not believe that this boy had such great power as that. However, to his misfortune, despite the explosion, the guy from before was intact, as if nothing had happened. In addition to the energy accumulated in the statue did not stop increasing. It was then that after presenting himself as Jackal, he revealed to him that in reality all that time they had been dancing a palm of his hand, explaining to him that the runes that the priest had drawn on all the statues had served practically nothing. In fact, it was he who diminished the energy of the ritual on purpose, to make them believe that his plan was working, and that in that way the priestess personally appeared in his castle, revealing to him that she and her power were the final piece to carry out the ritual. So after explaining all this to him, he asked the priestess to surrender voluntarily. After all, they no longer had more alternatives, although after hearing the negative of the girl, he used part of the energy that surrounded him to invoke dozens of undead who surrounded the boys. For his part, the priestess asked the protag to escape, while she tried to gain some time, since that was the least she could do to thank him for everything he had done for her. Although what left her cold was the answer of Zeke, who replied that he had nothing to worry about, and that even he was already aware of the guy's plan, and how his runes were not having any effect on the statues. Although Jackal, who seemed confused by his words, questioned him why he was aware of it, he did nothing to avoid falling into his trap, to which the protag replied that simply because he needed to gain time for the arrival of Antoine, the best knight of the priestess, and who was considered practically a monster, but who had had to separate from her to carry out another mission. However, at that time he was arriving at the facilities, sweeping with how many zombies crossed his path. Obviously, Jackal was shocked. After all, that guy was known as a monster in combat and could present a threat to his plans, so before he appeared on stage, he made one of his best attacks to end the life of both the protag and the priestess, to in that way start with the ritual immediately, since once initiated, no matter how strong Antoine was, he could not do anything to stop him. What he did not expect was that this attack had no effect on Zeke, who had perfected all kinds of demonic attacks in his past life. So an attack of his same element and of a lower level had no effect on him. This left the Fruit Son cold, who little by little began to see himself cornered, even more so when the Beast of Antoine made an active presence in the place. But hey, the Fruit Son, seeing himself in such an extreme situation, wanted to use it in his favor, turning Antoine into one of his servants. So he tried to use part of the evil energy that he had gathered to carry out his plan. But his idea failed immediately, since he did not have that. Antoine was a real monster with an incredible speed, which he used to destroy his spellbook before he could use it, completely neutralizing it. However, when everything seemed resolved, the guy played his last card, activating the ritual immediately with the energy he had left. And he told them that although he could not carry out his plan as he had thought, at least he would turn zombies into a small part of the population. And although the gentleman threatened to take his life if he did not stop, the guy replied that it was too late, the energy was spreading, and even if he ended his life, the ritual would not stop. However, he realized that a few minutes later, despite having released the energy, everything seemed very normal, as if the spell had not worked. Wondering what the hell was happening, it was then when Zeke, in an epic way, approached him to tell him that in reality, all the time he had been dancing a palm of his hand. Since the symbols that he drew on the statues did work, he simply waited for the right time to activate them. In other words, he never had a single chance of victory. But hey, after this humiliation, we see how a day later, everything had returned to normal in the town. There were no traces of the cursed energy that had been accumulating in the territory. For his part, Antoine took advantage of the moment to thank the Prota for everything he had done for the priestess. After all, if it were not for him, perhaps at that moment he would not be alive. He also reveals to us that it was Javier, who by order of Zeke, was in charge of taking the message to Antoine, who was in the middle of another mission. But hey, despite the fact that Antoine and the girl insisted that he accompany them to give him an adequate reward for his help, the Prota refused, since he had a place to visit. So after saying goodbye, he set off for his next destination. By the way, once they returned to the church, both Antoine and the priestess decided to keep the identity of Zeke a secret, since if the church priestess came to find out about the demonic abilities, in addition to the runes that boy used, they could start a hunt against him. So for the moment, the best thing was to keep his identity a secret. By the way, while he was in that place waiting to be sent to another mission, the girl ran into nothing less than the Fruit Son of the hero of before, who told her that from that moment on he would be working for her as an escort, accompanying her to all the places she visited. Although the girl noticed that the latter was trying to approach her more than she could, something that he did not want to allow. After all, he had begun to develop romantic feelings towards Zeke. Although as soon as the latter retired, we see how the Fruit Son of the hero, like the Prota, had traveled to the past and wondered why the hell he manipulate that girl, taking more work than the last time. But hey, leaving that aside, we see how while the Fruit was on his way to his next destination, he took advantage of his passage through the forest to continue training Javier. After all, he wanted him to improve his skills as soon as possible, so that he could be a good support. But while he was in the middle of the forest, they ran into this boy from here, Ferran Torres, who was being chased by some goblins, which obviously were not a problem for the Fruit, who got rid of them in just seconds. By the way, after thanking them for their help and introducing themselves to them, the boy told them that in fact he was in the middle of a training to become a gentleman, but he was not able to face those creatures. Moments later, the instructor of the boy became present, furious with Ferran for not having been able to overcome such a simple test. Although after he left, the Fruit realized that the face of that boy seemed quite familiar to him, and he was sure that he had crossed it in his past life. But hey, a few hours later, while the Fruit was in one of the inns of the town to which they arrived, Javier took the opportunity to ask him what was the reason to have that remote town as a destination, since he seemed to be in a hurry to get to that place. To which the Fruit replied that he would not believe it even if he explained it to him. And Senyo reveals that a few days would take place in that town, a tragedy, the appearance of the demon of destruction Nguyen, who would destroy all the surroundings. So his intention was to witness the blessed event firsthand. By the way, in parallel with this explanation, we see how the boy from before had a small mole called Nguyen in his power. Yes, the same name of the blessed monster. In addition to this, they show us how an organization, and the same for which Jackal worked, were interested in the blessed mole and the boy who stayed close to him. So much so that they had even hired the instructor from before to keep them watched. and it seemed that the moment they had been waiting for had arrived, since as soon as the night entered, the fruit children started an attack against the boy with the goal of taking him and the mole with him. With what they did not count was that while they were moving at great speed through the streets of the town, his presence was captured by Sick, who immediately realized that what they were carrying with him was the boy from before. So without a doubt it was after them, equalizing their speed. The boys quickly realized his presence. They tried to get rid of him, but no matter how hard they tried, their attacks did not seem to serve any purpose against the monster that stalked them, and that after killing a couple of them, he intervened to prevent them from continuing on their way, asking them what the hell they planned to do with that boy. And well, one of them managed to stop his escape. Again, he asked them who the hell they were and where they were taking that boy, but as expected, the guys refused to speak, and several of them rushed against him trying to destroy him. What they did not expect was that they had run into a real monster, and the difference between their skills was too great. So much so that the latter only needed a few minutes to completely destroy them. However, one of them took advantage of the distraction to escape the place as soon as possible. Obviously, the promoter did not plan to stay with his arms crossed. So as soon as he got rid of his opponents, he continued the persecution against the fruit's son, who was heading to a kind of mines. However, when the promoter was about to reach him, he was intercepted by another assassin squad like the ones before. So he had no choice but to face them, trying to hurry up to continue with the persecution. That yes, despite eliminating them without a major problem, he realized that something was wrong. Those guys had very good skills to deal with simple assassins, and he wondered if those guys were related to Naoan's appearance that would take place in just a couple of days. So to get out of doubts, he took the opportunity to ask one of his attackers, who was still alive, if they had something to do with Naoan. What he did not expect was that as soon as the guy heard that name, he used his own spell to self-eliminate, which only confirmed that everything was related. By the way, while the promoter was in charge of these guys, we see how inside the said mine, as soon as the boy regained consciousness, the assassin began to manipulate him, revealing to him that the demon that years ago had finished off part of the town, including the life of his father, was none other than that little mole with whom he had lived for so many years. Of course, what the guy was looking for was that the boy was devoured by anger, since apparently he was the key to releasing and controlling the power of the demon within the little mole. Unfortunately, his strategy gave no result, since the boy, being dominated by all the anger he felt, entered a kind of trance state, fusing with the power of the demon, awakening a much more powerful creature. On the other hand, as soon as he got rid of the mishaps, he finally reached the entrance of the mine, where to his surprise he met the boy, being totally controlled by Naoan's power, and who in fact set his target as the good Zeke. On the other hand, the latter did not understand what was happening, wondering why the boy was in that state. Although he began to believe that perhaps this boy could be Naoan, the demon that he met in his past life, a theory that he confirmed after the guy reacted like a madman after hearing the name of Naoan, immediately referring to a huge thirst for blood against the Prota, who was trying to assimilate what was happening. After all, the features of that boy did not coincide with those of the demon he had met before, although he preferred not to focus on it and try to leave the boy unconscious before he released all his power. Otherwise, seriously, it could become a serious problem and very difficult to control. Of course, the boy, totally dominated by Naoan's power, would not make it easy, launching several attacks with the sole aim of completely annihilating Zeke, who was able to dodge them with ease, thanks to his experience in the battlefield. However, when he managed to get close enough to hit him enough to get him out of the game, the murderer of before interposed on his way to stop his stalking, and well, they reveal to us what was the objective of the organization for which the latter worked. It turns out that what he was looking for was to use the boy as a catalyst for Naoan's power, and that in that way it would be much easier to control him and seize his power, making him a slave to his organization. However, he was surprised to realize that Zeke was aware of Naoan's existence, so to avoid leaving loose ends, he decided that the first thing he would do at that time was to end his life. Although he could realize that the Prota was not a common opponent and it would not be easy to annihilate him, so he decided to adopt his true form, becoming a kind of corpulent monster and drastically increasing his skills. For his part, the boy, who was still dominated by Naoan's power, set the latter as a target. However, it took him more than a simple blow to leave him unconscious, since he planned to take care of the Prota first, and then take the bearer of Naoan under custody. After this, the battle between the two began, in which at first it seemed that the techniques of the Prota were not giving results, due to the great defense of his opponent, who began to make fun of him, since he had overestimated his skills, and in the end he had ended up being a scum that only served as a boxing bag, or that was what he believed, since he did not count on the fact that the stabbings of the proto were impregnated with an extremely strong poison, and which had an extremely fast action. So much so that in just seconds the guy was against the ropes, and Zeke quickly took advantage of the opportunity to finish him off, flying his head. After all, he did not want to waste time to solve the problem with Nowan. For the mind with this we see as a boy after being sent to fly by the Azazen, he ended up being found by Javier, who obviously without knowing anything what was happening, he approached him to try to help him. What he did not know was that he was making a grave mistake. This because as soon as the boy began to regain consciousness, the power of the demon inside him also returned, this time looking at how he is objective to the poor boy, who was terrified to notice the monstrous aura that this guy emanated. For his part, this last one immediately began his attack, trying to immediately eliminate him with large rocks. Luckily, Javier, despite being scared, remembering the training he had had to undergo with the Proto, was able to react in time, avoiding some deadly attacks. However, he knew that he could not maintain that rhythm for a long time, and as soon as he lost concentration for just a few seconds, he would be annihilated. Unfortunately, that moment arrived after the boy used a high-level technique, which Javier had no way of facing. Luckily, just at that moment, the good Zeke made an act of presence, not only to neutralize his attack, but also to take advantage of the small gap and approach the boy enough to hit him hard enough to knock him out. Fortunately, his strategy gave result, and the guy was not able to react in time to the great speed of the Proto, being unconscious due to the impact. Meanwhile, we see how being unconscious was able to connect with the spirit of the mole, or well, the demon that at that time was inside him, and although at first he was furious with him for being the cause of his father's death years ago, in the end he understood that it was all an accident. After all, the little mole was not able to control the power inside him, so after understanding it, he told him that they could continue to be friends as until that moment. In addition, he would help him by being the container of his power, to avoid accidents like the one from a few years ago. But hey, once everything is resolved, we see how the Proto was in charge of cleaning the scene of the incident and get the boy out of that place, so that when the paladins checked what the hell had happened in the mines, they could not track what happened until the latter. After all, he had some plans for him and that boy. So once he was calmer in the inn of the town, when Javier asked him what the hell he was going to do with that boy, since in case of leaving him alone, he could become a threat, in case of losing control of that power, the Proto approached him to propose that from that moment, he became his servant and helped him complete some missions that he had in mind. Of course, in exchange for that, he would take care of giving him adequate training to fully manipulate his skills. Obviously, the boy agreed with his offer. So after reaching this agreement, the three set out for the next destination that the good Zeke had set, and where he had planned to meet one of his former servants. After all, he wanted to check what the hell he had become now that they had started from scratch. But hey, the group set out for their next destination. Yes, as promised, while they were on their way, Zeke was giving both boys adequate training so that they could improve their combat skills. And in fact, the two had managed to learn some techniques that could be useful in case of running into an opponent who put their lives at risk. And while they took a break from all the training, the boys questioned where they were heading, something that the Proto told them that at that time they were heading to the city of Offspring. After this, the Proto explains to us in more detail how in his previous life he had had 4 demons who were at his service, warriors who in fact had exceptional skills, and one of them was from Offspring, so he was eager to know how that guy was acting in that new life. But hey, after continuing with the trip after several days touring the territory, they finally arrived at the blissful town. However, when they arrived, they noticed that something was wrong, since they could feel a strange aroma around them. It was then that the Proto clarified that this aroma was the descent of bodies being incinerated. Obviously, his words left both boys cold, who wondered why the hell was something like that happening. Minutes later, they were intercepted by several gentlemen who apparently were guarding the border of the town, and who quickly questioned them what the hell they were doing in that place. Something that the Proto explained to them that they were nothing more than simple travelers who had arrived to that town looking for a place to stay. However, their words did not convince the gentlemen at all, who could not believe that simple travelers had crossed the forest plagued with beasts. So believing that they were villagers who were trying to escape from the city, they were asked to accompany them to their camp to see if what they said was true. Although once in that place they realized that something was wrong. Practically the whole camp seemed like a kind of hospital, until they finally arrived with the captain of the knights, who after meeting him, he politely introduced himself to them as Dracula. However, his presence left the Proto cold, since the blessed guy was the person he was looking for. Yes, his former servant, although from what he saw he still did not become the demon that he had met. A guy addicted to blood, who used to race with entire armies who dared to challenge him, and with whom he shared a glass, after winning some battle. But hey, the latter, after introducing himself, explained to them what was happening and the reason why they had been taken to their camp. It turns out that he was the captain of the night squad, who had been sent to that city to contain the virus that at that time was raging with the lives of hundreds of villagers. It was for this reason that they were taken to that place, since they feared that they were infected citizens who were trying to escape from the town, and who could take the virus to another territory. Unfortunately, now that they were in that place, they would have to stay a few days, since they could not run the risk of being infected. Although after listening to the Prota, he did not have problems following the orders. After all, he had deduced that something like this was happening. He even offered himself as a volunteer to help in everything that was necessary to contain the outbreak of the virus. However, at that moment, they were interrupted by one of Dracula's men, who commented that another infected had appeared. Unfortunately, when they arrived with him, they realized that they could not do anything to help, since his condition was quite serious. By the way, while they were there, the Prota could notice something strange in Dracula. It was then when the latter told him that he could not do much to help, since he had a huge blood phobia. Words that obviously left Sick cold, who remembered how in his past life that guy used to be a blood addict, and in fact all his techniques were based on the manipulation of this. Understanding that it was for this reason that he still did not wake up with the demon that he had once met. But hey, after understanding this, the good Sick decided that he would stay close to the latter to discover that it was what had led him to become the ruthless demon that he met years ago. He also did not even have clues of what would happen, since the guy he met was very reserved and he never wanted to talk to him about his past. But hey, after this, the Prota spent the rest of the days helping Dracula and his men in everything he could to stop the blissful virus, accommodating all the knowledge he possessed about medicinal herbs, knowledge that in fact had been transmitted to him in his past life by Dracula himself. Unfortunately, in the end, despite his efforts and those of Dracula, they were not able to contain the transmission of the virus, which after a few days ended up devastating the lives of all the villagers. So the only thing that Dracula could do was incinerate them to prevent the virus from being transmitted to other communities. The worst of all was that in the mission he had lost dozens of his men who unfortunately contracted the virus. But hey, once the mission was over, the guy and the remaining men of his squad decided that it was time to return to their base. Yes, not without first thanking the Prota for everything he had done for them in the last days. After all, his help had been essential. However, while they said goodbye, they were interrupted by one of Dracula's men who told him that they had received new orders from the high ranks. Unfortunately, the orders were not very encouraging for the guy and his men, since in them they indicated that the virus had been discovered in a new region, so they who already had experience dealing with it would be sent again to try to contain it and find a solution for the disease. This left his men cold, who could not believe that they would be sent again to another mission like that. After all, it was the third town that they would have to visit. It was then that the Prota understood what was really happening. Apparently, Dracula was being sent to those missions because most likely it was that his superiors wanted him to contract the disease and finally lose his life. Of course, as always, the guy was right, since at the same time with this they present us to the older brother of Dracula, this fat man here, who apparently was behind that his brother was sent to missions like the ones before. In fact, his men were the ones who had been in charge of spreading the virus in several cities, so that his brother would sooner or later end up infecting himself, since his goal was to become the universal heir to his family. But he was furious with his men, since until that moment his plan had been a complete failure. No matter how much Dracula had sent increasingly dangerous missions, he continued to come out alive from them. For that very reason, he asked his right hand that this time he put in motion a radical plan, with which his brother was finally eliminated. But hey, leaving that aside, we return with our Protas, who after being sent to a new town, despite the fact that they tried to save the townspeople, the result ended up being the same. Yes, Dracula was still coming out alive from the missions. However, while they were in charge of incinerating the bodies, the Prota could feel a strange presence stalking them, so he quickly asked them to show themselves. After this, a squad of Azaishin, like the ones who used to seek the power of the mole, emerged, trying to end his life. Of course, the latter did not represent a threat to him. However, he asked his students to take one of the guys and take care of them. That would be his exam, after the training that they had had to undergo in recent weeks. And while the boys took care of their opponents, Sid took care of the rest, ending each of them without major problem. That yes, he realized that apparently they belonged to the same organization as before, deducing that the safest thing was that those fruit children were after Dracula. realizing that this guy had had to face many problems in recent days, and perhaps in his past life it was for this reason that he was forced to become a demon. Although after realizing this, tying ends, he came to the conclusion that some of the demons that he had met in his past life were forced by that organization to become demons, beginning to wonder if that was the same thing that had happened to him. Perhaps having become the Demon King was part of someone else's plan, and that someone could be the leader for whom all those fruit children worked, explaining to us how in his past life all kinds of horrible events occurred to him, which even made him think that life was against him. But perhaps all the problems he faced had been planned by someone else, so that sooner or later he would fall into darkness. Just as he was now running with Dracula, however, discovering that filled him with a huge euphoria. After all, now he had a new goal, much more interesting, to discover who the hell was behind all that and make him pay very dearly. Meanwhile, he was in charge of digging one by one with the rest of the assassins in a brutal way. And after finishing with the altercation, the boy tried to leave at least one of the fruit children alive, in order to interrogate him and get some information from his leader. Unfortunately, that did not result, since after seeing each other cornered, the fruit children self-eliminated, so as not to leave any clue about the organization for which they worked, which complicated the investigation of Zeke quite a bit, and he still did not know how to find a clue to reach his leader. By the way, he began to wonder if he should continue to help Dracula, since if he continued like this, he would probably not become a demon like the one he met, and would continue as a normal human, until he came to the conclusion that the best thing was that in that new life he would continue as a normal human. So he would do everything possible to prevent the boy from falling into the traps. After this, we see how both had a little chat in which Dracula explained to him how he had ended up having to complete missions like that, revealing how a year ago his father became ill with a strange disease, causing his older brother to take the position of patriarch until he fully recovered. Since then, the fruit son had been giving him missions of a high degree of danger. However, while they were talking, they were interrupted by one of Dracula's men, who told him that he had been sighted by his brother in the capital of his kingdom. Since apparently the virus that they were facing had reached that territory, this left the boy cold. But the protagonist began to believe that all that was a trap to finally end his life. So he decided to accompany him to that place. And well, once in front of the fruit son of his brother, we see how the latter began to blame Dracula for what was happening, blaming him because it was most likely that one of his men would have led the virus to that place. So he ordered Altanera to take care of controlling the outbreak before it escalated further, or otherwise he and his men would pay the consequences for it. Without wasting much time, Dracula and his men began with the work. However, after analyzing the people who had been infected so far, they realized that the pattern was the same. The virus spread quickly, and although several doctors had been working to try to find a cure for it, none were lucky until that moment. However, the strange thing was that the virus that hit the city was not the same as they had been facing. So they were not responsible for the outbreak in that territory. Obviously, the outbreak was already expected, something like that, since according to him, the safest thing was that it was all the work of Dracula's brother, who was probably working with the leader of the assassin organization from before. Luckily, there was a light at the end of the tunnel, since after analyzing the disease, the boy realized that he already knew her, and in fact he knew a way to treat her, so containing her and eradicating her from the city, this time it would be possible. By the way, good Dracula was surprised that a common traveler like Zeke had the knowledge necessary to create such an advanced treatment, explaining that with that formula he could become a millionaire and even gain great renown in the kingdom, since not many doctors had discovered the antidote for a disease as deadly as the one they were facing. What he did not expect was that the protagonist told him that he did not plan to sell the formula or anything like that. He simply wanted to do good, so he would not have a problem in giving the details of how to create it. His words left Dracula cold, who did not explain where the hell a guy like Zeke had come from. After all, until that moment he had never met someone so disinterested in power like him. But hey, after this, Dracula's men were in charge of distributing the medicine to those affected by the virus, managing to eradicate the disease completely in just a few days. Although as expected, the rumor of it did not take long to spread, reaching the ears of Dracula's brother, who sent his right hand to personally investigate who the hell was the famous Zeke, and why he had been helping his brother. So a few days later, Zeke received the visit of the fruit son, who in a threatening tone questioned him where the hell he had gotten the antidote for the virus. Of course, the fruit did not plan to be afraid, answering that he had no interest in revealing something like that to him, telling him that if he wanted to, he could discover it by force. Obviously, his words made the fruit son angry, although before they could start the fight, they were interrupted by Dracula, who was in charge of pacifying things, telling the old man that he would be in charge of bringing a report to his brother of everything that happened, but for the moment he would have to retire, an order that the old man had no choice but to obey, although as expected, he did not plan to leave things like that. He had put a blank on Zeke, and he did not plan to rest until he got rid of that threat, and well, after he left, Dracula explained to the fruit that the reason why that guy had acted that way was because the safest thing was that his brother was furious at all the appreciation that people had put on them in the last days to eradicate the disease, since that had made him the best candidate to become the heir to his family, which obviously did not suit his brother. So they would have to be very careful, since the most likely thing was that in the next few days they would try to end them.